Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have you here today for the next in our 6-session series, Day 1 and Beyond, which is taking you through a series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. For those of you who might be new to these events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for end users. I'll drop some links throughout the presentation today that will lead you back to those forums. And if you're not already a member, we invite you to create a free account, join in discussions, post questions, and look for upcoming events on all kinds of topics. My name is Kenna Kettrick. I'm a program manager with the OCI Go-to-Market team. And today I'm joined by Kumar and Brandon Alarie, both cloud engineers here at Oracle. And today they're going to be focusing on a technical quick start on OCI. I will go ahead and hand it over to Uma. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Kenna. So hi, everybody. Welcome. While you guys are answering this poll, we can do a quick introduction if you didn't attend the last session. So just to let you guys know who we are, my name is Kumar. I work for Oracle on our customer enablement team. I'm a staff cloud engineer, so really excited to kind of be bringing you guys this program and really hoping that you guys can take away some knowledge from this. And I'll let Brandon introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Alarie. I'm also a staff cloud engineer here on the Oracle Customer Enablement team, and happy to have you all today.
Yeah. So just to kind of quickly go through what we'll be covering today as our agenda. So today, like Kenna mentioned, we'll be taking you through the Oracle Cloud technical quick start. So this is kind of a quick start that has a lot of different pieces from our other more product specific quick starts, such as like networking, security, database. So we'll kind of be going through a lot of different topics today. So we'll give you kind of an overview of OCI in general, and then go a little bit more specific into like identity and access management, networking, and so on. And then we'll also be sure to pop into the console a few times so you guys can kind of see actually where this can be applied, what we're talking about. And then as always, we'll hopefully have some time for a Q&A as well. So you may have seen this screen already, but we just like to kind of put it up again just to show you kind of a list of our complete cloud services. This is not a totally exhaustive list, but you can kind of see from the different parts of it, like what we'll be covering today. So right now, this is like everything under the sun, but mainly today we'll be focusing in on governance and administration, kind of under security, learning about identity and access management, as well as under core infrastructure, learning a little bit about the networking, our different compute shapes, as well as storage. And then we also kind of wanted to mention too, like as you go to the top, we have like our SaaS applications and some of our PaaS services like analytics and database. So there's kind of something for everybody, I feel, in OCI, depending on what the workload is and kind of what your company is trying to do.
Yep, and next, so we have our Oracle Cloud Infrastructure regions. So you can see this is our global footprint map, and this is our most recent map. So currently we have 37 regions with 7 planned, and then we also have 10 Microsoft Azure Interconnect regions.
Mm-hmm. And so kind of as we are expanding quickly, a lot of these regions have one availability domain, and I think you can kind of find a list on cloud.oracle.com to see which regions will have 3 availability domains, depending on kind of what you're trying to do. But just a little bit more about regions. They are like separated by vast distances up to 50 miles, I believe. And generally, you're going to deploy an application in the region where it's going to be most heavily used, because you're using nearby resources, and that will be faster than using, your distant resources. So that's just a little bit about regions. And then you can kind of see we do have some government regions as well, specifically for government organizations, as well as our interconnect regions, where we have on the back end worked with Microsoft Azure in a kind of a partnership to kind of make it easier for, in today's world, a lot of people are using hybrid cloud and multi-cloud vendors. So it's just kind of a way to make it easier for customers to kind of enact their whole cloud environment.
And now that we've talked a little bit about regions, we can take a look at the data centers within a region. So these are going to be referred to as availability domains. And typically within a region, you'll have more than one availability domain. And this is so you can deploy highly available systems or applications within that region. So if we look at the visual here, we have, our region at the bottom, and then within this particular region, we have 3 different availability domains or data centers. And these are going to be separated. They're not going to share the same infrastructure, the same resources. So if something were to happen in availability domain 1, for example, there's like a fire and availability domain 1 goes down, it should not affect availability domain 2 or availability domain 3. And then within an availability domain, we have fault domains. So these are separate, isolated groupings of hardware. And again, they don't share resources. And this is another feature that can be used for redundancy or failover. So essentially, you'd want to keep your application separated on these fault domains if you're trying to keep, redundancy and have a highly available application.
Yeah, exactly. And then just to kind of build off of that, we do want to mention that, the availability domains that are going to be located in the same region will be connected by, a low latency, high bandwidth network. And so it'll make it possible for you to provide the high availability connectivity to internet as well as on-premise and be able to build out your replicated systems in multiple ADs for high availability and disaster recovery. And fault domain is just kind of an added aspect of that. Is within your AD as well, there are separate groupings of hardware. So if you want to be able to deploy your infrastructure, you can kind of narrow it down and be very specific on even which fault domain and which availability domain that you would like to deploy your resources to really enable you to achieve that high availability and kind of help with disaster recovery. So now we can talk a little bit about, we talked about the bottom layer right now, which is your regions. And then as we go through, we'll have our physical network, virtual network. And then at the top, you can kind of see all the different technologies that will be included in your environment or that you have access to. And so kind of just wanted to give like a visual representation of the layers of what it'll look like. And obviously on OCI, you'll mainly be dealing with the top layer of your resources, and everything else is kind of abstracted from you. And that's what Oracle is taking care of. And then I did also want to mention the concept of off-box network virtualization, which is something else that Oracle does, which I think could differentiate us from a lot of different other cloud vendors, where basically the virtualization is not done on the hypervisor layer, but instead it's engineered into the network outside the physical box. And so this kind of provides you with a higher level of security and performance. So a lot of times when security is a big concern moving to cloud, this is one of the features that a lot of customers and people that we see like to take advantage of or like to see. So there's definitely that aspect that kind of separates us. And so now I'll let Brandon talk a little bit about our security.
Yeah, so this slide here shows many of our key security services across Oracle Cloud. All the way on the left-hand side, we have identity and our security services around identity. And then on the far right, we have our internet and edge. But you can see we have a very robust set of offerings around security. For example, when it comes to compute and storage, we have our encryption, we have our off-box networking, and we also have a certificate service where you can easily manage your certificates. When it comes to networking, we have, our virtual cloud networks and those virtual firewalls that, are associated with them, such as security list or network security groups. If you wanted to, get more granular and have a more defined security posture. As far as monitoring and prevention, we have, some of the best tools integrated directly into the OCI console. So you're not going to have to go to like a third-party source. And that's key, here when we're talking about ease of use and security. You want everything to be as like easily accessible as possible. So by going to that, single dashboard where all your services are, makes everything a lot easier. And some of these monitoring services that would fall under this category would be like CloudGuard or our vulnerability scanning service. We have some different logging services that you can enable on different resources such as virtual cloud networks. We have our VCN flow logs, or if you wanted to enable some logs for your load balancer, you can enable error logs or access control logs. And then finally, we have our edge services. So under this, we have our DDoS protection and our WAF protection. So our WAF protection, this is going to be our web application firewall. And this is going to protect any of your internet facing endpoints from many different types of attacks, whether that be bots or cross-site scripting, but there's a long list that's available to you online to view more of the features for these products.
Yeah, and so this kind of image was taken kind of directly from our security quick start, which I believe will be a future session where we kind of dive deeper into some of the tools that Brandon just mentioned, but really just kind of want to reiterate on the fact that, no matter like where you are, whether you're focusing on your data or networking or user access management, there's so many different security features and tools that Oracle provides to you. And there's a lot of automated tools as well, such as CloudGuard that we went through to kind of help you get the best security posture out of your OCI environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, so next we'll talk about compartments. So a compartment is essentially like a logical container for your resources. And this is going to serve as an access control boundary and also a cost boundary. So within our cost analysis tool in OCI, you can actually run your cost analysis and generate your reports based upon compartments. And like I mentioned, this compartment is a collection of related resources, such as, compute instances, virtual cloud networks, that can be accessed only by groups that have been given permission. Such as, your administrator. And then you can also use tagging. So if you were here for last week's session, we mentioned tagging, and you can also track costs based upon your cost tracking tags if you wanted to do it that way. So if we look at this visual here, we can see that we have our different compartments at the bottom. So we have our security compartment, network compartment, and then above that, we have our different management groups, and these groups are going to be assigned policies to be able to interact with different resources within that specific compartment. And we also have our users, and our users are going to be assigned to one of these particular groups. But I guess the main point here is that you can see like a separation of duty. And it's very clear, like our network administrator group only has access to our network compartment. And, same with our database administrator group, they only have access to our database compartment. So it's important to, follow the principle of least privilege and only give your users access to, do the things within Oracle Cloud that they need to do.
Yeah, exactly. So not only are compartments like a great way to logically organize everything that you're working on, but they're also very fundamental in granting access to who can use what and like how they can use it on your OCI tenancy. So like these colorful arrows that we have here can kind of be thought of the policies. So in order for the different administrative groups to be accessing the resources in different compartments, they'll need to have policies granted to them. And so we'll kind of go through that right now. So that is a part of our identity and access management, or IAM for short. And it basically enables you to control who can do what in your OCI account. So kind of if you look at this visual, we can see our identity and access management, and then we'll have the actual identity. So who is requesting access as well as the permissions. And so your identity can be usually will grant access through a group. So you'll have users, which will represent like individual people in your company who want to access OCI and be able to utilize the different resources that we have. They will be put into specific groups. And then from there, an administrator will grant the group a specific policy to access the resources within a compartment. So one of the other things that we also have in this visual is you can also see an instance as well. So we'll kind of go through in this next slide. I'll have Brennan talk a little bit about the differences between the different types of groups. So we have groups that are, made of people, of humans, and then we'll also have something called a dynamic group, which could be made of an instance, and kind of talk a little bit about how instances can also request access as well.
Yeah, so you would use instance principles to allow your instance to make API calls. And you would set up a dynamic group. So it's similar to a regular group, but instead of adding users to your regular group, you're going to add a matching rule. And this is going to be specific like criteria that you set up that is going to match your instance. So for example, a matching rule could call upon a specific compartment, or you could call upon a specific instance's OCID, which is like a unique resource identifier for a particular resource within the cloud. It's going to have that OCID, and then you would go into your dynamic group and set up that matching rule, and then your instances could act as principal actors and make API calls to different resources that you have. So kind of tying this all together, all right, we have our users here on the left, and then our groups, and then on the right-hand side, right, we have our instance principals and dynamic groups.
Yeah, and then you would essentially use policies to allow these different groups to have access to resources or compartments as well. So for this last slide, before we jump into the console, I just wanted to give some examples of different policies. So we have pretty simple ones. You can kind of see here in our tenancy, let's say we have two compartments, compartment A or compartment B. And then just as a simple example, we have different users or the same user, it could be in group A or in group B. And then there's going to be different policies based off of which group you're in. So policy A is allowing group A to manage compute. So managing all the compute instances in the compartment A. And then policy B will allow group B just to list the compute instances in compartment B. So depending on the verb that you're given, so you can see the two verbs here are manage and list. So I believe it's like inspect, read, use, manage. Those different types of verbs will grant kind of the level of access. And we can definitely, once we go into the console, we can look up some documentation as well that kind of takes you through specifically what verbs you'd want to use, and depending on what verb you use, like what you're actually granting the user or the group access to do.
Yep, and I think we can jump into the console.
Okay, great. I'll hand it over to you then.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
All right, nice. So this is the main Oracle Cloud console. When you log in, this will be, the home page that you're greeted with after you successfully log in. So before we jump into, identity and access management, I just want to talk about this home page a little bit. So up here at the top left, we have our menu, and this is where all of our different resources are located. We can also search for a particular resource here. And we also have a search bar at the top here. And like I mentioned, each resource that you deploy is going to have that unique identifier or OCID. So if you had that copy and pasted to a clipboard, you could also search for that particular resource based upon the OCID here. And then this here on the top right is where you would select your region. So as we talked about earlier, there's many different regions that you have available to you. So this is just an example of some of the regions that I can deploy resources in, but I can also go to manage regions and add or subscribe to a new region if I wanted to deploy resources there as well. So it's pretty easy. You just would click the subscribe button to subscribe to a new region. And then on this main page, so we have many different quick starts and ways to easily launch resources and different wizards that we can use to help us, create virtual cloud networks, for example, or set up other resources within our environment. So with that being said, I'm going to jump over into this menu and go down into identity and security. And we can see these are all of our, identity and security resources that we have available. And we can click on identity. So the first thing here under identity is users, and we can easily create a user. So we have a user type, which is IDCS or IAM user. So you can make your user an IAM native user, but they won't have access to all the different platform services. And if you wanted a user to be able to interact with some of the platform services, for example, like Oracle Analytics Cloud or Oracle Integration Cloud, you would want to set them up as an Oracle Identity Cloud Service user. And then, the rest is pretty straightforward. You just give them a username, email, first and last name and phone number. And then here you have the optional, you have the option to add them to a group if you want to, or you can add them to a group after creation. And then these are some of the different users that we have within our account. And when you first create a user, you'll notice here that if they don't confirm their email address, it will still say verification pending. So next we'll talk about groups.
Real quick, Brandon, before you go into groups, if you click back on users, I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention to, you can see you can basically kind of tell the difference whether they are a local IAM user or if it's been federated with IDCS. So again, like Brandon mentioned, the difference is the IDCS or federated users will have, sign-in access to our platform services. So you can kind of see the first two, they're not federated, but the next two, it says identity cloud service / and then their email address. So that's kind of a way to tell as well if they've been federated or not. And then you can also see in our federated column, it'll have a yes or a no. But you can just see that is the identity provider that this tenancy is using is IDCS. So it's just dependent on, again, if you already have an identity service, identity provider, what you want to use and how you choose to federate.
Yep. Thank you for that, Uma. All right, so we have groups next. So if you remember, you're going to assign your users into a group, and then you're going to write your policy statements, and your policy statements are going to call upon a group, and that's going to be assigned at the compartment level. And we'll take a look at the policies next, but these are our groups, and we can easily create a group. You would just give it a name and a description here. And we can take a look at an existing group here. So just take a look at, we should have an administrators group here, image administrators. All right, so we have this group image administrators. And here we can see that we don't have any users within this particular group, but we can easily add a user here. All we would do is, click add a user and then select the user. And we can also see under this resource section, we have an identity provider mapped group. So this group here, image admins, is created within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, but we're also, connected to that Oracle Identity Cloud Service as our identity provider here. So with Oracle Identity Cloud Service, you can also map your groups and create groups there. So we have a respective group created within our Oracle Identity Cloud Service, and it's named Oracle Identity Cloud Service. And these groups are mapped together. So I can also, log into this identity provider and manage the group there. So although you don't see any users here that are assigned to this group, within our identity as a service tool or Oracle Identity Cloud Service, that's where we're, connecting the users, and we're using Identity Cloud Service and, putting the users in the group there. And then this is going to be mapped back to this respective group within Oracle Cloud. So it's just another way to, use groups, but in this case, we're not assigning users here. We're actually doing that within our identity as a service tool, Oracle Identity Cloud Service. All right, and then, these are some example groups that we have, and we can easily just create a new group if we need it. All right, so next we have our dynamic groups. And these are going to be similar to regular groups, but they're going to be for your compute instances or instances that you want to be principal actors or make API calls to other instances or services within Oracle Cloud. Then you will add them to a dynamic group. And it's going to be a similar situation here where you would just click create dynamic group, give it a name and description. And then this is where you would define those matching rules that I talked about earlier. So it gives you an example here, and this is going to be an example OCID. So this one is calling an instance OCID. And we can look at the rules down here, and we actually have this rule builder, which is going to help us to create these rules. So we can do instances that match all of the following or any of the following. And then we can either, select compartment OCID or instance OCID. So if we had multiple instances within a compartment, we could actually use that compartment's OCID. But if we have, other instances in that compartment that we don't want to, have the ability to make API calls, then we can just be more granular and specify that specific instance that we want to make calls. And then we would, choose that here, instance OCID, and then we could specify our OCID value here. And then we would just hit add rule. So that is how you set up a matching rule. And then with advanced options, you can always set up a tag. And this is, adding metadata to your resources. So if you wanted to tag this dynamic group with, let's say, like a environment or cost center, we could do that here and, track everything back to this specific tag. So that is a way to create a dynamic group. All right, so next we can talk about policies. And these are all of the policies that are created at the root compartment. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, we have a list scope where we would select our compartment. And you would typically want to have your policies written at the highest level compartment that you have that is related to your project. But you can see all of our compartments here. So we have our root compartment, and this is gonna like overarch all of our other compartments. And this is like the highest level compartment for our tenancy is the root compartment. So most of our policies are going to be written at this highest level here. So, we would select our root compartment, and then we can view all of our different policies here. So for an example, I'll just click on one of these, our OBank auditor policy, and we can see that we have 16 different policy statements here. And this is an example of what the different policy statements would look like, right? So you have allow group, and then that's going to call upon this specific group. And you can also have, a different group, any group that you would please. And then you have your verb here. So as Uma mentioned, we have inspect, read, use, and we also have manage. And then we have the particular type of resource. So it could be all resources. For an example, we have load balancers or any other resource. And then you would specify the tenancy or compartment that you would want this policy to apply to. So this one, for example, is applying to all of the different compartments in the tenancy, but we could be more granular here and specify a particular compartment.
I was wondering, Ridden, if you can talk a little bit about like how policies in the root compartment, are they inherited by the child compartments, and kind of what that looks like? Like, let's say put a policy on a compartment with a bunch of different child compartments. Is that automatically applied to the other child compartments?
Yeah, so policies are automatically inherited by subcompartments when they're applied to like higher level compartments. And like all of the policies that are inherited are going to, your policy or your compartments can go up to like 6 levels deep. So you can have a tree, like a hierarchy where your policies are at the top of the tree, and then you specify the compartment below it. And, those policies would only apply to that compartment that's specified. But if you're not going to specify the compartment, one of the child compartments that's lower, it's going to apply those policy statements to all of the child compartments below, that one at the top of the tree. So by default, your child compartments are going to inherit the policies that are written, at their parent compartment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. And then before we kind of go back into the presentation, do you think we could talk a little bit more about federation and kind of show them how it would be set up?
Yeah. So federation, that's one of our options here under identity. So we can add another identity provider here within our tenancy. We have Oracle Identity Cloud Service, or IDCS, but we can easily add another identity provider, whether that be Microsoft Active Directory Federation or any SAML 2.0 compliant identity provider. You would just go through this short process setting up the federation called Federation Trust, and then you would easily be able to, have your users federated. So as an example, we have Oracle Identity Cloud Service, and we can see that these are all of our users within our identity provider, but we also have this column here, which is OCI sync user, and you can sync the users that you have within your identity provider to your users back in Oracle Cloud infrastructure. And the same goes with groups as well. So here we have all of our groups within our identity provider. Image admins is the one we looked at earlier. And then we can look at the group mappings. So here we have our identity provider groups and our OCI groups. And here's the one that we looked at earlier. So image admins, and this one is going to be mapped over to, IDCS and OCI. So it's called the same, but, it's a federated group that exists within OCI. And then we have a respective group within IDCS where we can actually manage the users of this group.
Cool. Anything else you want to cover before we go back to the presentation?
Yeah, so I'll just touch on this again. So we have compartments. I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but I just wanted to touch upon this again because it's pretty relevant. So this is where you would come to create your compartment, and we can view all of our different compartments. If we go into our individuals compartment, we can see all of the different child compartments below it. And, this is where you would manage your compartments. If you wanted resources to be like automatically tagged, you could go into tag defaults and set up automated tagging so that every resource that you can create within this specified compartment is going to have an appropriate tag. And then I just wanted to also talk about the policy verbs again. So if we come back in here and create a policy, we can see that we have this policy builder section, and this is going to help us create our policies for our environment. So we look at our policy use cases here. We'll have our different use cases. So for an example, let's just say we wanted like a Linux compute virtual machine. So we would just go to compute management, and then we have our common policy templates here, and we can select a template to use. So let users launch compute instances on dedicated virtual machine hosts. And then we would just select our group here. So just to try to keep it the same as before. Yeah, so we can just select any group here. And then our location, we would specify our specific compartment. And as you can see, we're using this policy builder to actually build out these policy statements. And then we can just copy these and add them to, our policy statement section. Or we can just create them here and this will save, but we can also go back into this policy later and add more to it or make changes if we need to.
Yeah. And then one thing to note is if you clicked root compartment in location, that would just, I believe it would just say tenancy, yeah, or root. So the root compartment is basically the same thing as your tenancy when you're talking about policies.
Yep.
All right.
All right, I think we can switch back over into our slideshow now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing all of that. So now we're just going to kind of go through a lot of the different resources, kind of categorized by what they do. So right now we'll kind of talk a little bit about monitoring management. All of these resources, we do a deep dive in our operations quick start. So definitely look out for that in the coming weeks because we will be kind of going through each one in more detail. But just to kind of give you an overview, we're talking kind of about 4 different services on this slide: our OCI monitoring, our notification service, logging, as well as resource manager. So our monitoring service basically captures different metrics that are constantly, being emitted by your different resources, whether it be like your autonomous database or compute instances. And you kind of are able to look at all the different metrics in one place. And you can also create different alarms based off those metrics for a more like active monitoring or passive monitoring. So if you create an alarm threshold, let's say for a specific database, if the CPU utilization goes and passes that alarm threshold, you will be notified via our event service, our notification service, which kind of ties into there. So our notification service is just our way to broadcast different messages and from different applications and services. And so It is also integrated with our identity management as well. And you can deliver to email, Slack, PagerDuty, or third-party applications as well. And our monitoring service, again, you can integrate it with a few different other OCI resources, such as like our event service as well, which will go more in depth in the operations quick start. And then I also wanted to mention logging. So we have kind of a single pane of glass for all of your logging or for all your logs in our logging service on OCI. So there you're able to create, your custom application for on-premise applications as well as security logs. You can look at all your different service logs as well as the audit logs in your tenancies. So that's kind of a great place to be able to capture all the different logs that you would be using from the different resources that you're working with on OCI. And then lastly, I wanted to mention Resource Manager. So this is kind of our Terraform as a service, we call it. So it basically allows different teams to easily and reliably deploy and manage your OCI resources with the infrastructure as code service. So if you're not familiar with Terraform, that is an infrastructure as code, open source language. And then, we'll again go more in depth, but I just wanted to mention that this code base kind of helps simplify different migrations to and from other environments and kind of helps you deploy and execute several different times and is a really good way to kind of set up your environment.
Yeah, and I could just add something in for logging. So with logging, when you navigate to that section within the OCI console, you'll see the option to either like create a custom log, or you can create service logs. And the service logs are really easy to enable on an existing service. And this is like a pre-defined like logging, template that is going to be like easy to use. So for an example of this, like a service log would be like a VCN flow log. You would just have to go to the OCI logging page and then enable that service log for a specific service. And all the options are there on that page. So, and then on the topic of like monitoring, you can also extend Oracle's monitoring with like open source tools, such as Prometheus and Grafana. So you can use these tools to extend your monitoring within the cloud.
Yes. So now we'll jump kind of right into our networking overview. And again, we are doing a separate session completely dedicated to networking. So we kind of just wanted to throw up this example architecture. It's just a simple architecture diagram of an Apache Tomcat server connected to MySQL database. And right now we just kind of mainly want to focus on the different like networking symbols and topics to kind of iterate the different tools that you have at your disposal. So I'll kind of go through it quickly at a glance. You can kind of see the main outer box is our OCI region. So that could be, Ashburn, Phoenix, whichever one is closest to, where you're deploying your data. And so we'll have a VCN again, which is our virtual cloud network. And then we can see there's different in the region. You can see in the darker shaded boxes, we have our availability domain. So that's our data center, as well as our 3 different fault domains. So you can kind of see we'll have, for example, the load balancer, there's an active one and then a standby one. So that's again built in for like your high availability as well. And then you can see that we have several different subnets, a couple public subnets that will have internet access, and then a few private subnets, which is where our servers and database will be stored. And then I wanted to ask Brandon to kind of explain a little bit about, in terms of security and our networking like firewalls, the symbols on the right-hand side, like a shield and then kind of like a table to kind of go through and add a little bit about what those features are.
Yeah, so on the right, you'll notice like within each subnet, we have these little symbols. So the first one on top, which is our like little shield, is going to represent our security list. So for each subnet, You can create security rules that specify the source, destination, and then the type of traffic that is going to be allowed in and out of the subnet. And then below that, we have our symbol for our route table. And the route table is going to contain rules that route traffic from subnets to destinations outside of the VCN, typically through a gateway. So as you can see here, we have our internet gateway at the top, but we also have some other gateways available, such as our NAT gateway or, dynamic routing gateway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those gateways kind of each serve a different purpose. So like your internet gateway is for, public internet access, whereas like a DRG, dynamic routing gateway, would be more if you wanted to peer different VCNs that were located in different regions, or be able to peer with your on-premise environment as well. And then we also have things like a service gateway, which allows you to, again, connect to your public OCI resources. So whether that be integration cloud or analytics cloud or something like that, we'll definitely be going through the different types of gateways in more detail in our networking quick start.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and then just wanted to give a brief overview of our different compute services. So the compute service just helps you provisions like virtual machine or bare metal instances to meet any of your compute or application requirements. And so when we talk about an instance, we're just talking about a compute host, and you'd be able to choose between your virtual machines or bare metals. And so with a bare metal, you'll get the full bare metal service with no noisy neighbors, and you'll have performance overhead. And it's mainly for performance intensive workloads. You do not need a hypervisor, or you don't need a specific hypervisor, but there is an option to bring your own if you would like to have your own bare metal and virtualize yourself. And then we also have our virtual machines, which is using a hypervisor to virtualize the underlying bare metal servers into smaller VMs. And you can run these VM instances on dedicated servers that could be single tenant and not shared with other customers. And you also have more flexibility in shape. So we have some of our shapes here in the second row, which we'll definitely go through once we jump into the console. And then at the bottom, we have our different types of storage, our locally attached storage, as well as our block volumes and remotely attached storage. And that kind of brings us into our next slide, which is a little bit about all the different storage services that we have on OCI. So Brandon, do you want to talk for a few minutes about this one?
Yep. Yeah, so this is a compare and contrast visual of the different storage types that we have, comparing, durability, capacity, unit size, and the different use cases. So as we can see, like with object storage, this is a great example of, a storage service that we use for images, logs, videos. We can see it has unlimited scalability, and, the unit size could be up to 10 terabytes an object. And, this compares with our other services. We also have archive storage, and this is going to be our long-term archival and backup storage solution. Then again, like you can also have 10 terabytes an object here, and the main use case is for long-term archival and backups. I'm not going to touch on all of these storage services, but you can refer to this slide here. It has like a comparison between the different services on Oracle.
Yeah, definitely. And then lastly, we just wanted to have a quick slide on database. So again, we'll have a separate database quick start kind of going into each different service and kind of the use cases for each one, and kind of when is the best time, depending on your workload, to use these different types of services. But kind of what's great about this graphic is, again, it shows a little bit more of taking you from customer managed to fully managed as we progress from like a left to right. So these are all different options that you can use on Oracle Cloud, but depending on how much management you want as the customer or how much management you want Oracle to take on, you can basically decide on these different options. So like we mentioned before, you can always provision a compute instance and then run Oracle database on it. You can also take advantage of our database as a service or database cloud service. So this is where you'd be able to provision different VM or bare metal databases. And then we will also have Oracle Exadata. So either Exadata Cloud at Customer or Exadata Cloud Service. And so this is like our extreme performance based database. And then lastly, for fully managed, this is our autonomous database. So this is when you kind of want to take a lot of the responsibility and kind of like tedious tasks that DBAs go through day to day. We actually, our autonomous software kind of does a lot of those things for you, such as like scaling, tuning, patching, indexing. So all those things are definitely helpful for allowing DBAs to focus on, gaining better insights from the data, going more into our analytics and data science as well. So that's also another option. And then just to quickly wrap up, this is just, again, like a little overview of our different OCI cloud services. So we kind of touched on all of these today, a little bit of identity, networking, compute, database. And again, as we go through the different lectures and webinars for day one and beyond, we'll be covering a lot of these in more detail. And then I wanted to kind of do a time check. I know we only have 5 minutes left. Kenna, do you think we have time to quickly jump into the console to show a provisioning of a compute instance? Or should we end here?
I think if it's pretty quick, if folks want to stick around for that, then we just take a moment or two.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll show you it really quickly. So let me just get it up on my screen. And then I'll share it with everybody. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my screen. So again, this is our home page that Brandon went through before. And I'm just gonna go straight into our menu and click compute and then instances. Just wanted to show kind of the different options. So we can choose the different compartments. So I wanna work in Brandon's compartment today. We can see like we already have a few different instances running. You can kind of see the public IP, private IP, as well as shape and a few other kind of metrics on it. And so if I just go into create instance, you could give your instance a name, again, choose the compartment you want it to live in, and then be able to choose the different availability domains. So I'm working in our home region, which is Ashburn. So I can choose that. You can also choose the different capacity types, and then as well as the fault domain as well. So you can either let Oracle choose the best one, or you can specify a specific one. And then this is where we kind of look at the different images. So we have a variety of different images. We have our Oracle images, platform images, even custom images. If you wanted to bring your own image or clone an image, this is where you would be able to look at that. And so these are kind of a little bit more information about the different images, as well as like the OS version and the build. So I'll just keep this, default. And then we also have our shapes, which we talked about previously. So we have a few different shapes depending on whether you're looking at bare metal or virtual machine. So for our bare metal, you can see the different, we have our dense IO shapes, as well as GPU, HPC. And those are, again, all kind of based off of the different kind of workloads you're running.
And this can be like kind of overwhelming. So how do I know like which shape to choose?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the different like VM shapes, we have like 3 types of VM shapes. We have our standard, dense IO, and our GPU. And so the standard VM compute shapes are going to be great for like your general purpose workloads. It provides a balance of cores, memory, and like network resources. And then our dense IOVM compute shapes are more better suited for like resource intensive workloads, so such as like large databases or big data applications like Hadoop or Apache Spark. And then we'll have our GPU VM compute shapes, which are going to be your specialized shapes for like rendering, scientific computation, and machine learning workloads. And there's definitely a lot more information on our page of documentation, kind of going through the different shapes. And so you can also see the different series of shapes we have. We have like our previous generation ones, the Intel standard shapes. We have our AMD shapes, as well as our Ampere, which are ARM-based processors. So those are kind of just a brief look into all the different shapes that you're going to be able to choose from. And then moving on, like you can just choose networking. You can either create a new virtual cloud network or you can choose an existing one. I'm just going to choose this one because I think we're actually at our service limit in this tenancy for networking for VCNs. So this is just a previous one that Brandon had already created in his compartment for load balancer. And then here's where I could choose to assign it a public IP address or not, depending on if it will be, internet facing. And then this is where I would add my SSH keys, so I could upload my own key file or paste them, or I can generate a key pair and be able to save the public and private key so that I'm able to go into the instance. And then we also have some more options on boot volumes. And then I did want to mention this, I'll go ahead and create it, but we also have a save as stack option. So that is a little bit more into resource manager. So if I wanted to not create the resource right now, I could save it as a stack, and it would be saved as a stack in our resource manager section of OCI, where I could go and see all the different configurations for what I'm looking at, and then decide to, deploy it later or replicate it. And then this is still provisioning. I think it'll take like a couple minutes for it to be available, but I just wanted to point out this is our OCID. So like we mentioned before, if I wanted to put this instance in a dynamic group to make different API calls, I could definitely come here, copy this OCID, and then go into dynamic groups and be able to paste it where Brandon showed us. We can also see, our public IP address as well as username. And then some more details on the instance, such as like the instance type and shape configuration. And then we can see that it's completed. And then there's a lot of other different kind of resources that we can go more into. But for now, I just kind of wanted to show really quickly, this is how you'd provision an instance. And I think that should take us to the very end of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Uma and Brandon. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's stuck around. I've just launched our final conclusion poll. If you want to give us a little bit of feedback on the session, we always like hearing from folks on that as well. And I've shared a link to where the replay and slides will be, so that resource is available for folks to check this out again. And we will be having Larry and Jeremy back next Wednesday for a bit of a deep dive. And then we'll have Uma and Brandon back on the Tuesday after that, alternating Tuesdays, Wednesdays for the next month or so. Quite a bit of sessions coming up that we're all looking forward to. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, audience, for sticking around, and we'll see you all next time. Have a great day, everybody.